Hey, good morning, everyone. Welcome back. It's FPC Radio Live, Tuesday, February 27th. Remember, folks, we got 2 more days here in this wonderful, wonderful month. But it's almost March, which means it's almost NFL free agency. We've been talking about it every show that we get on here because why the hell not? It's a great, exciting thing to talk about. There's going to be a lot of player movement as we see each and every year. But John, look again. This is for a lot of teams. This is the best time of the year. This is where your hopes are the highest, and for the first time in 20 some odd years, well, not the first time. It's been gradually building to this, uh, but for the first time in nearly over 2 decades, this is the biggest time of the year for the Patriots. Whereas in years past, it was always late January or early February was the biggest time. But nonetheless, we are for every team out there. There is hope. There is a chance. There is some sort of redemption, unless you're the Jets. And I look, I know, Aaron Rodgers. I get it. It's going to be fun to watch him. It's the Jets, John. I'm sorry, they're not going to win the Super Bowl. Just rip that Band-Aid off now. Just
To
saying.
get the Super Bowl, they're going to make the playoffs. They have the longest drought,
Yeah.
postseason drought of any team in the four major sports, which is incredible. They haven't been in the postseason since 2010. It's been 13 straight years.
Yeah,
without
and
making
they
the
went to an
postseason.
AFC Championship game that year too.
Back-to-back years. Yeah, I mean they won 4 playoff games in that 2-year period, all on the road.
Mhm.
Mark Sanchez has, I think, more road playoff wins than Aaron Rodgers, and actually more road playoff wins than a lot of quarterbacks. And then they got to the AFC Championship game, and they were not good enough to beat the Colts in 2009 and the Steelers in 2010.
If I remember
really
correctly, though, wasn't that kind of a weirdly close game in 2009?
The Jets were ahead.
Yeah,
The Jets were ahead the second quarter, and then Manning led the Colts down on a drive that tightened the game up, or maybe gave them a short lead, and then the second half they kind of blew them away. And it was the reverse. The next year, the Steelers got way ahead. The Jets made a comeback and almost were able to pull it off, but I think Roethlisberger had a big third down conversion to run out the clock and give the Steelers. But both games were competitive for a while, or at some point in the game, so they weren't that far off. But again, limited a quarterback. You're going against Peyton Manning and Ben Roethlisberger, and you're showing up with Mark Sanchez. You don't have a chance. You would think if they can get to the postseason this year, they have a better chance with Aaron Rodgers. He's 40 years old.
You know what?
See how he is.
The funny thing is if they were around in this era of the NFL, they might have gone to the Super Bowl. Because, I mean, the reality of it is we're seeing that more and more. Now it's like, yeah, obviously Patrick Mahomes, Tom Brady before him. I mean, those two guys, just like Manning and Brady before that, were kind of like, okay, one of those guys are probably going to be in the Super Bowl. But you're still seeing like Brock Purdy, Jimmy Garoppolo, and Jalen Hurts. I mean, guys that I think the verdict is still out on Hurts and Purdy. Hurts having one really good season, one not so really good season. Brock Purdy has had 2 pretty good seasons, hasn't been able to finish the deal. So, there's obviously some questions moving forward, but these aren't the quarterbacks of 15 years ago. And we keep bringing this discussion up because I think it's more evident now than it was before that. I mean, we're just in a weaker era of quarterback play. It doesn't mean we don't have great quarterbacks in this league, John, but I think the depth of the position across the league is not what it used to be. And again, it opens the door for the Brock Purdy's and the Jalen Hurts of the world to get to the Super Bowl. And the funny thing is, I feel like Mark Sanchez and the Jets of 2009, 2010 fall squarely in that category. So maybe they could have gotten to a Super Bowl if they played 10 years later.
Yeah, I mean, they had the defense, right? They could run the football. Their offensive line was pretty solid. They had some playmakers, decent special teams.
And what have we said about what the most important thing about this era and what it does for quarterback play? It elevates mediocre quarterbacks more than anything. And I think this is the time of year that Mark Sanchez could have flourished. Not consistently, but he could have had a really good season or two.
Oh, yeah, without question. I mean, I liked him. I thought he had good leadership qualities, tough, fairly athletic. Just wasn't an accurate passer. And if you're not an accurate passer, you can have every other part of your game and you're just not going to be an elite quarterback. You're going to be decent at best, right? I mean, did anybody have better intangibles than Tim Tebow in terms of toughness and leadership? And I don't know if all of his teammates loved him. They probably thought he was kind of full of it. But, you know, he was a winner. The guy knew how to win in college, and he pulled off some games in the pros. He couldn't throw the football. Like, that was still the final thing. He was like Milos playing tennis against Jerry.
Right.
You know, with a fancy tennis suit. But when he started hitting the ball, you're like, oh, that's the instructor? He's, you know, way worse than I am as a student. But, yeah, you can get those quarterbacks like Brock Purdy, who happens to play on a really talented team, and Jalen Hurts, who plays on a really talented team, getting to the Super Bowl. But, you know, I was thinking this the other day, Ian, 7 of the last 10 Super Bowl champs have been either Brady or Mahomes. So they've kind of put a stranglehold on winning Super Bowl.
Well, and
not quite sure if we've ever seen that type of run before, because from two guys, right? It's kind of odd that we're going from the greatest quarterback of all time to maybe the third greatest quarterback of all time, who's right in his prime. That generally doesn't happen. There tends to be a little bit of a gap there. It's kind of stunning.
It's like the bizarro Packers. Like, you go from one generational quarterback to another, but you actually win multiple championships.
It's the way to rub it in, Ian. Thanks.
Well, no, look, this is a shot at the Packers.
Absolutely true.
Yeah, you know, so.
Well, the quarterback has something to do with it. I probably should have won another Super Bowl, and Rodgers should have at least another Super Bowl, at least make an appearance in the game.
But again, going back to what we were just talking about, though, is it Aaron Rodgers, his career is so just I don't think anyone ever discusses it correctly, because it's like, yeah, is it disappointing that he only won? And I speak in terms of like he's not playing anymore, because I'm fairly willing to bet that him and the Jets are not going to win a Super Bowl. They have like this year. That's it. If they don't win this year, it's not it's just not going to happen. So is it disappointing that he only won one Super Bowl? Well, not really, because I think, unfortunately for him, and this is, you know, kind of what was happening or is happening to Patrick Mahomes, but at least in Mahomes' case, he is winning multiple Super Bowls. He got compared to Brady so early. And even when Rodgers first started, the gap wasn't as big as it is now between Brady and Mahomes. But the reality of it is Mahomes has gone to and won multiple Super Bowls. So that's the big difference here. But the thing is, it's like, you know, Aaron Rodgers, he's the best. Oh, team wins are not, or team stat, this, that, and the other, every excuse in the book. But the reality of it is he didn't perform at his absolute best in conference championship games, which directly relate to going to and getting an opportunity to win more Super Bowls. But it's not like it was easy, John. I mean, think about the teams that he goes up against. San Francisco, a great team when he faces them. Mm-hmm. Think about what happens to Seattle against Seattle, another great team again. And then people point to, and I'm certainly guilty of it when it comes to going back and forth with Aaron Rodgers fans, and be like, well, look at Tom Brady and what they did to Seattle 2 weeks later. Well, guess what? Tom Brady's a better quarterback. It's not a knock on Aaron Rodgers, okay? Seattle was an all-time great defense for those few years. Let's not like put that past them. So is it unfortunate that the Packers weren't able to capitalize on those Russell Wilson mistakes? Absolutely. But guess what? That Seattle defense is pretty darn good. So it's not, and obviously in a time, you know, obviously rules were shifting at that point. So I don't want to pretend like it wasn't like that, but it wasn't. It's still, every year we go on, these different rules open up the game more and more, and, you know, make it a little bit harder to play defense. I think you went up against an all-time. Look what they did to Peyton Manning the year before, John. And does Peyton Manning get nearly as much slack for that as Aaron Rodgers does for failing to beat Seattle the year after?
No, I mean, it was such a blowout. I mean, that game seemed over after the first.
It was over,
right?
because it was a safety. And you just,
safety. And then I think Seattle kicked like 2 field goals, so they're up like 8-0. I'm like, well, Denver shouldn't be out of the game right now. I mean, a touchdown and a 2-point conversion.
But you saw it though. They were the body language
was really good.
Yeah.
And the thing about Brady, you go back to Super Bowl 49. For the first 3 quarters, it sure looked like they were doing to Brady what they did to Rodgers, what they did to Manning. You know, but in the fourth quarter, Brady this is one of the things that separates him from so many of the other near great quarterbacks or great quarterbacks. He lives in the moment better than anyone. Like he can go through three rough quarters and say, okay, I've got 15 minutes left. We're down 10. I've got the ball in my hand. I can take care of this. You know, a lot of the great basketball players do this. He tends to allow himself to forget the mistakes from earlier. Not that he forgets the mistakes, he learns from them. You're a goalie, right? Isn't that one of the things you have to do? You give up a bad goal in the second period. Well, I'm not giving up another one. You can't let that linger on and lead to three more bad goals in the third period, or else you're losing the ball game. So that's what Brady does so well. And I think Mahomes, too, now, we're seeing that because he wasn't great for the first three quarters of the Super Bowl against the 49ers a couple of weeks ago, but from the fourth quarter on, he was great.
Well, and you know, I'll give you credit, and you know, we've talked about this a lot. I mean, there's a lot of things that they do similarly, and I think unfortunately, the discussion centers around just their play style. And to me, my biggest issue is equating a difference in play style to being better. Like, is Patrick Mahomes more athletic? Absolutely. I mean, no one is going to bet on Tom Brady winning an agility a contest or some sort of like you know what I mean, some sort of a race or whatever. I mean, but unfortunately or fortunately, that's not what we're doing here. And oftentimes people will talk about the off script or off balance and all this nonsense, and I sit there and think like, is this figure skating? Does he get more points for that, or are there judges up there holding up numbers after the play? Like, no, that's not what football is about. So unfortunately, I think a lot of people focus on those things, and then we get this a schism of fans where Patriots and Brady fans and Mahomes and Chiefs fans will never agree because you know athleticism is the be all end all when it's not. And that's not to say that Mahomes' athleticism doesn't make him a better quarterback. It does. But it's just in my opinion, certainly when it comes to talking about elite quarterbacks, it's a different style, not a different ability. Because at the end of the day, and this is a discussion I get into all the time, especially on Twitter, they can make the same plays. And I'm not talking about, you know, people often come back and be like, oh, well, what about running to his left and throwing across his body? It's like, that's not what I'm talking about. Pick a location on the field, okay? And tell me that player A or B cannot make a throw to that spot. I don't care what happens before the ball's released from their hand, John. They go about, they create time in different ways. Brady is much better inside, and this isn't a knock on Mahomes, by the way. Brady is a much better player inside the pocket than Mahomes is, and Mahomes is outside than Brady is. It's just how they play. So Brady diagnoses plays. He makes reads before the ball snapped. He changes things at the line. He reads things at a rapid pace, and that's his advantage. That's his legs. I'm not saying Mahomes can't do that. I'm just saying Mahomes uses his legs to create some of those advantages. So they just do it a different way, John. But when you're looking at it, when you're talking about, well, are they going to make the right play at the right time in the crunch situation? Absolutely. Right now, there's no two players I would pick in my lifetime. You know, certainly there are players that are played, and I'm not counting Joe Montana because I've seen him play, but at the very tail end of his career. There's not a player that I've watched players better than those two at doing it so far. I mean, it's just that's what it is.
I don't even know who would be third. I mean, Manning and Rodgers are great, but
that's the big separation.
Class as far as it is, because they weren't able to do it in the biggest moments. They just weren't. I mean, look, Peyton Manning, love him to death, 14-13 playoff record. You know my feelings on Aaron Rodgers, 11-10 playoff record. Brady's at like,
and it's as, and John, it's as simple,
ridiculous thing.
And everyone's like, you know, people will sit there and look at Aaron Rodgers' playoff stats, and I get it. It's very heavily weighted towards games against Arizona in his first game. Like, I don't care about divisional and wild card games. I really don't, John. The difference between Aaron Rodgers being a fringe top 10 quarterback of all time and being one of the talked about as one of the greatest is 5 games. And it doesn't seem
NFC championship games, right? Even the one he won, he wasn't overly impressive, to be honest with you. DJ Raji scored the biggest touchdown of that game, and he was a 350-pound nose tackle, so figure that out. Yeah, no, that's where Brady and Mahomes, it seems like as the playoffs go on, their play gets better. with every
Right.
round, which is kind of
And
what
and
you
and
hope that you do.
and it's not, and I would say not necessarily, because this has always been the big knock on Brady, because obviously now too, against modern quarterbacks, this generation of quarterbacks, his stats just aren't going to necessarily game to game stack up. Certainly early in his career. I mean, if you're going to judge him based on some of the stuff he did late in his career, because then it would stack up and exceed some of these other guys. But in that sense, it's not going to stack up because look, different eras, different ways that offenses were played and how they were approached and defended and stuff like that. I mean, this is a perfect example. I mean, what Patrick Mahomes had this year in terms of offensive support around him was, I mean, I think it was better than some of those early Patriots teams, maybe save for 2004. But even then, marginally better. So like Brady did this early in his career, and his numbers were, wow, remarkably similar to what we saw Patrick Mahomes put out this past season. So if this is what it's going to be like for a stretch for Patrick Mahomes in terms of offensive support around him, and this is saying nothing against him, I'm trying to drive home a point that, forget about these total numbers. I don't care that Tom Brady threw 27 touchdown passes or 28 touchdown passes in 2002. Forget about the fact that it led the league at the time. But people will use that as a negative. I'm like, what are we talking about here? Like, imagine if Tom Brady started his career with Rob Gronkowski and Randy Moss. Do you think he's only?
Yeah.
Do you think he's only, even in his very, very young early playing days? Do you think he's only throwing 18 touchdowns? Like,
well, let's not forget that first year he didn't play the first
right.
2 games,
right?
And it was just a different time. Like Kurt Warner was putting up ridiculous numbers, but not many other quarterbacks were at that point. Favre would, but he was also throwing a ton of interceptions. So yeah, I mean, that Joe Montana wasn't throwing 36 touchdown passes a season either. It was a different time.
Yeah.
Now it's completely different. And look, I live these weird comparisons, and I try to hammer it home back 40 years ago. Magic Johnson and Larry Bird, the 2 best players of the era until Michael Jordan came along. Everyone would say, wow, they're so different, and this and that and the other thing. And one guy's L.A., one guy's Boston, one guy's black, one guy's white, one guy's flashy, one guy's not. I go, you do realize they have a lot more in common than you want to admit. Like, they're both from the Midwest originally. They're both great leaders. They're both great teammates. They play with their brain. Arguably the 2 smartest players in the history of the sport. They're both mentally and physically tough. One guy fits L.A. with a smile and the flash, and Bird fits, Northeast Boston, where it's cold and dark and, more of a blue-collar city, which it really isn't anymore. It's incredibly expensive to live up here. But they have a lot more in common. And I want to bring this back to goaltending. Okay, so your favorite goaltender of all time, you grew up idolizing, was Martin Brodeur.
Yep.
Let's take him, and let's take Dominic Hasek, who was incredible, right?
Mm-hmm.
2 great goaltenders. I'll leave Patrick Roy off to the side. I'm just going to use your goalie and Dominic Hasek. Both great. Did they do it completely differently? In some ways, kind of like Brady and Mahomes. Wouldn't Brodeur be Brady, like clinical, whereas Dominic Hasek had the highlight saves? Maybe because he was out of position. I don't know.
I would honestly,
like a street goalie, if anything.
I would honestly probably say Brady was more Patrick Waugh, because Patrick Waugh was he was a classic butterfly goalie, very mechanical, very structured. Brodeur was a little unconventional. So maybe he
more
could
athletic, maybe.
Yeah, well, I mean, you could maybe call him Patrick Mahomes if you want to do that in terms of. I mean, I don't know if that's the perfect. Maybe more Aaron.
More Aaron Rodgers, although a little more winning. Isn't Hasek really Mahomes?
Yeah, I would say so, just because
I think,
because it's unconventional, and it's like, he's doing things that, like, again, I mean, Dominic Hasek, he could be on his back and he'd somehow, flip his leg up and make a save out of nothing. So, I mean, in that sense, like, yeah, he was incredible, and you can make an argument that, like, just ability wise, he could have been the greatest. But yeah, it's actually, kind of a fun comparison if you think about it. So yeah, I would say this. I would say more so. I would say more so Brady would be Watt, just because I equate him more to a more structurally sound. Like when I was okay, here's a great example. So when I was growing up, every hockey coach, every goalie coach, quote unquote, basically anyone that they decided was going to be the goalie coach, would tell you, stay up, keep your stick down, blah 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 blah. Because that's what Patrick Waugh did, and that was kind of the, a lot of elite goalies. That's what it was. Stay up, keep your glove up, this, that, and the other. Well, I wanted to play a little bit more like Brodeur, which was kind of a mix, more of a hybrid. You know what I mean? So that's why I kind of think maybe Aaron Rodgers, because Aaron Rodgers, I think, is better than Patrick Mahomes in the pocket, quote unquote. But he also has an elite ability outside the pocket.
That's
in
a great comparison. Yeah, that is a real good one. Yeah, and then Prospect was like the highlight reel, like Mahomes, but they're all great. It doesn't mean they're not all great, and then maybe Carey Price is Joe Burrow, the most handsome man in the sport. Maybe that's the
Couldn't
guy.
Stay healthy.
And then, and I thought he was a great goaltender, and Henrik Lundqvist, maybe the most interesting man in hockey. So, you have all these great goaltenders that you can recall, but there's just different ways to do it. And then I go back to the Magic Bird discussion. And like you'd watch and go, these guys have a lot more in common than people realize. And because again, 40 years ago, the racial element came into it even more so than it does now. And then the whole LA Boston thing was really played up, So, and then they met 3 times in 4 years in the finals. They met in the championship in college. So it was a great rivalry. And then they grew to respect the hell out of each other and to become friends. That when it was announced that Magic was HIV positive, Bird went out that night and it was an ode to Magic Johnson. He was making passes that he said these are for Magic, and he welled up after the game, which he would never do. So and the same thing here with Brady and Mahomes. The styles are different, but they have so much more in common. That killer instinct. And back to the Roy Brady comparison, both kind of edgy guys in a sense. Like Brady does it with a smile on his face, but is an incredible competitor. Roy had an edge to him, right? I mean, if I recall.
Well, I mean, let's just remember his
to have edges to them.
Yeah, his very unceremonious exit from Montreal.
I remember that.
Yeah, I do too. Trust me, trust me. I obviously I started watching football at a young age, but I mean, I understood hockey so much younger, and I was able to watch it and appreciate it from because I played it too. I started playing early, so. But yeah, it's he's definitely got a little bit of an edge to him, but yeah, I think that was good. And look, I mean, I think that era of goaltending, those 90s to early 2000s was some of the best you're ever going to see in terms of, I mean, even your kind of like what we talk about the quarterback market from 10, 15 years ago was your secondary players were the Carson Palmers of the world, whereas nowadays he might be tier 1A or 2 or something like that. So we'll see.
Really good. I think he's the guy. If he had stayed healthy, gone to the right situation. I mean, he talk about
the Bengals. I don't want to say
the Bengals were pretty good. I mean, they made the playoffs a lot.
Well, they had. I mean, look, Chad Ochocinco, TJ Husmanzada. You had Willie Anderson there at the end of his career. You had some good.
Dillon was there
Corey Dillon was there. So they had some good players early on. They just could never really get it all together. So but
cheap ownership.
Yeah. No, that's what it is. And you're hoping if you're a Bengals fan now, history doesn't repeat itself. So, anyways, that's gonna do it. That was fun. I didn't expect to be comparing quarterbacks and goaltenders of years past, but I like it. My 2 favorite positions, John. Really, they are in all of sports. I think it's incredibly fascinating. The mental aspect of each position, and one of the reasons why I value it so much in quarterback plays, because goaltenders are very much similar, John. Very similar. And I think that is, again, more so. Well, maybe goaltending, you need a little bit more athleticism, just because of how it's goaltending. You have to move a lot. But in terms of like it's more mental than anything, because it really is.
Mm-hmm.
You can't have a long memory. You got to put things behind you and, kind of move on and move quickly. And that's what makes great goaltending, and that's what makes great quarterback. So anyways, John, that's going to do it. We'll be back on Thursday. We're going to, keep talking nonsense, whatever the hell we decide to, because that's what we do here on FBC Radio Live, especially in the NFL offseason. But folks, just a couple weeks away from the start of the new NFL league year. So we're going to have plenty to talk about here soon. So thank you everyone for tuning in. We'll talk to you soon. Take care.